Hello and welcome to Dialogue. Liberal values are declining and populism is on the rise, with the U.S. becoming the main force in undermining liberal international norms over the past decade. This is according to Yan Xuetong, a leading Chinese scholar in international relations, who says that China should give priority to neighborhood diplomacy, given that the current China-U.S. tensions could be a long-time trend. How worried should we be about declining liberal values and rising populism? How will China and the U.S. deal with their current frictions? And to what extent will global diplomacy be impacted by this year's many elections and the rising geopolitical tensions? To find out more, I'm glad to talk with Mr. Yan Xuetong, Secretary General of the World Peace Forum and also the Director of the Institute of International Studies at Tsinghua University. Join us for our discussion today from Beijing. I'm Xueqin. Professor Yan, welcome to Dialogue. So we start with, of course, the theme of this year's, Peace Forum. It has been, started in 2012, many, obviously, years. How do you compare this year's theme on security? Is there anything distinctive why you choose this theme for this year?
And World Peace Forum heavily focus on the security issues, and that's the basic distinction between our forum with the other international forums held in China. And we heavily focus on security this year, and you can notice that we heavily focus on the war. And not only how to maintain the peace, but also we're talking about if we failed to maintain the peace, we have to encourage all the participants of a war and to adhere to the norms of the human rights. So otherwise, and the international justice will be totally undermined. So that's why you see there's among the three words, and one of them is justice. So yeah, if you see what's the difference with the previous World Peace Forum, is that the justice is the first time used as a subtitle.
Because of the,
for this conference.
Mm-hmm. Of course, it has a lot to do with the current world situation.
Yes.
And in, I think, 2013, you wrote a book, The Inertia of History.
Yes.
And of course, you made predictions about things that will happen, 10 years later, now for 2024, it's more than 10 years. When you look back at your prediction, any reflection?
Well, actually, that book was published in 2013. At that time, most people don't believe the international configuration were transferred from the unipolar to the bipolar. But today, you see, most people agree with that, and the international configuration is has changed from unipolar to different configuration. And someone believes it's a multipolar, someone believes it's a bipolar, and no matter what, now we're in the transitional period. That means the unipolar system, unipolar configuration, and formally ended. So I think that book, the prediction by that book has been proved by history.
Yeah, to be right. And you said the biggest surprise of your forecast was the decline of liberal values and the rise of populism,
yes,
in which the U.S. becoming the major factor, undermining the liberal order.
Yeah.
Tell us more on that.
Well, liberalism actually was advanced by the United States after the Cold War. And based on the liberalist value, and we moved into the period of globalization. The globalization mainly composed of two parts: economic marketization and political democratization. Both of these two issues, and based on the ideology of liberalism. But now you find that American has already taken the leading role in undermining both of these two elements of globalization, and they started the economic protectionism. and decoupling, delinking, economic sanctions, and also they started to undermine the norms of human rights, and by supporting the Israeli government with arms to killing the women and the children in Gaza. So you see, this is a really important change in international politics. So when America was the strongest power in the world, and his action will inevitably have a strong impact on the global order, on the trend of the history. So that's why, from my understanding, the trend of the counter-globalization and mainly was maybe unpurposely and pushed forward by the United States.
Yeah, that is a surprise, I believe, for a lot of people. But of course, with the U.S. withdrawal sort of from globalization, from pushing forward for globalization, and also in particular this, as you said, about this on other fronts, for example, the support of Israelis in terms of this humanitarian crisis, women, children in Gaza, it must have a global impact.
Oh, yeah, the impact is that the trend of a counter-globalization has already proliferated and also split from the economic counter-globalization to political counter-globalization. So I think this is very obvious. It's not what will happen. It's happening now.
What do you mean by political counter-globalization?
The political part of globalization is a democratization. At the international level, it means that human rights norms. And these human rights norms are adopted by the UN, and the majority members agree that all the government has a responsibility to protect individuals' security. It's not national security, not state security, not the country security, but individuals' security. And so in that time, we even remember that there's a debate about which norms should enjoy the priority between the human rights and the sovereignty. And then at that time, I mean in 1960s, 1990s and first 10 years of this century, America argued that human rights and should have the first priority over the sovereignty. So
R2P,
now,
responsibility to protect.
Yes. Simplified as R2B. And how about now? America totally abandoned the concept of R2B and supported these unnecessary actions and violating the human rights norms in the Middle East.
Yeah, in the Middle East in particular. Of course, one of the key, I guess, for a lot of people, observation is really about the new, or if I may call it, in the global system, multipolar or bipolar. It's really between China and the U.S., the largest economies, most powerful countries probably. And you say that the tension between the two countries will be long-term, and you propose that China should prioritize the friendly neighborliness, such a policy to deal with the U.S. challenge. Tell us more on that.
Well, that's very simple. And for China, and if we identify ourselves as a rising power, and this concept means China is developed from a developing country to a developed country, and China will becomes a strong country in the world. And so, how can you make how can China make itself have that kind of global influence? That means you must have a positive impact or influence on the surrounding area. And if China cannot have the surrounding positive impact on the neighbors, it becomes almost impossible. And we have a positive impact on the whole world, the rest of the world. So that's why, according to the IR theory, or realist theory, we consider all of the rising powers have to get along with the neighbors first, and then they create a better environment for this country becomes a real global power.
Mm. In that respect, how is China doing? We know that China is the largest trading partner, basically of every, Asian nation or nations surrounding China. At least economically, China is doing well.
Well, that's really depends on the how the policymakers concerned and what's the approach to improve the relationship with the neighbors effectively. And some people believe, and we can improve our relationship with the neighbors by economic measures. That means give them some money. And from my understanding, this is it doesn't work. And if we want to get along with our neighbors, we have to provide a security protection for them. If we do not provide a security protection for them, and then the growth of China will brings about a kind of fear in our neighbors. Mm-hmm. That means they will raise the question. And when you are stronger than me, who can ensure that you will treat me nicely? So this is a very common issue faced by all the rising powers in the history in the last thousands of years. It's not a unique situation, and China just facing the common situation and by all the rising powers in history.
In terms of China's U.S. policy or policy on the U.S., we see basically, it remains unchanged despite the U.S. Giving up on engagement policy with China. They are not having a policy, whatever you call it. People call it containment. Some people call it a new Cold War on China. How do you see the U.S. policy on China? Is it containment? Is it a new Cold War? What's the purpose here?
Well, I think a lot of parliament, a lot of congressmen at the Capitol Hill want to resume a Cold War against China. Their logic is very simple, and they think since the U.S. won the Cold War, and by the ideological expansion and by the containment against the Soviet Union, so if they drag China into a new Cold War, and they have more experience to win the war rather than China, so for them they believe as long as they get China into the Cold War, they have more chance than China to win the competition. So that's also, I think, from my understanding, most of the Chinese people, including policymakers, understand this logic. That's why officially our government frequently repeat it, and we do not want a Cold War. And the most important thing for handle our relationship with the U.S. is to prevent a new Cold War.
Well, on the Chinese side, of course, China can continue its practice or its policy of, say, mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, or win-win cooperation, trying to pursue that kind of cooperation, that kind of policy with Washington. But Washington is not cooperative. Washington is imposing more sanctions.
We do not need Washington to be cooperative with us. Mm-hmm. As long as we do not adopt the Cold War strategy, and their Cold War strategy are doomed to fail. This is a game between two parts. Mm-hmm. And if the one part says, I do not want to play that game, they cannot play the game by themselves. So the Cold War is a game played by two parts are willing to play the same game. And when one part says, hey, I want to play the other game rather than this game, you can't, the one party can only unilaterally play the game.
What about the neighborliness? You talked about the policy. Okay, Japan, South Korea, important trading partner of China, and close neighbors. What about unilateral visa-free treatment for citizens from these two countries?
Well, already at this World Peace Forum, Hatoyama suggests that China should resume the policy, give the free entry of the Japanese tourists, 15 years free entry to the Japanese tourists. From my understanding, opening up policy will benefit China, and rather than closed-door policy in any sense.
People are talking about the rise of protectionism and also populism, kind of like with the elections, like in European Parliament, you see the right-wing parties are winning more support, and also in France, for example. Are there any consequences of the rise of the right or the rise of populism?
The rise of populism will bring about more conflicts between countries, more military clashes between countries, and more violation of international norms, and more troubles, and also the slow growth of the economy. And I don't think the rise of populism will bring anything good to this world.
Negatively there.
Yeah. And they're also saying the rise of the populism won't bring anything good to China.
It's the same to every country, it seems.
Yeah.
Of course, between China and the U.S., one of the key elements, if not the key element, the key factor affecting this relationship is the Taiwan question. Where are we now, and what's the future prospect?
Well, I think if you talk with the people at the World Peace Forum, you find that most people realize that after the San Francisco summit, and China and the U.S. already developed a kind of a mechanism to manage the conflicts over the Taiwan Strait. And so my understanding that this, the issue of Taiwan Strait is no longer as dangerous as last year.
So as part of this overall relationship is being stabilized. People can be concerned with the new leader in Taiwan. In his first speech, he talked about basically like one Taiwan, one China.
Maybe someone concerned about that. I think most people don't worry about that.
It's not a big worry anymore.
Not big issue.
Not big issue anymore. All right, it's good to hear that. You said that when it comes to this ongoing Ukraine war in the European continent, you said China basically. Let's say there are a lot of damages to China in terms of national interests. What should China do, probably to help end the war? The Finnish President Alexander Stubb said, as long as Beijing picks up the phone, and then the war will be end.
Well, if the U.S. do not have the capability to let the Israeli government to stop the war in Gaza, I doubt any country has the capability to let the Russian to do anything according to others' will. And Russia is a nuclear power. They have their own capability. They make their own decision. I don't think anyone can make Russian change their decision by making a phone call. That's too naive.
What about Trump? Trump says, I will bring the end of the war in 24 hours.
Well, that's what he said, but the history may not prove what he has that capability. Mm-hmm. He said he has that capability, but I doubt he has it.
What's the impact? We are seeing the repercussions of Ukraine war, obviously beyond the European continent, beyond Russia's relationship with Western nations, with the U.S., with Ukraine, of course, with European nations. How big impact is it globally?
Well, if you compare the two wars, and you find that the war in Gaza has a kind of impact of proliferation from the Palestinian to Yemen, Syria, and the other Arab countries, and Lebanon, and somewhere. But the war in Ukraine and has not spilled over the border, have not spilled to any other countries. So I think the two wars are very different.
So are you saying that its effect is limited?
No. The fact is not. They are different nature. They have a different impact on the global order.
If you talk to the Europeans, basically, when they say, the Chinese would assume our relationship with the European nations is really about us, our China, European nations, business, economy. But for the Europeans, their number one item usually on the agenda when they meet the Chinese is Ukraine.
Yes.
How is it affecting this relationship?
No, because they're on the war. For them, the war is the most important. For instance, when we were on the war in the Korea and in 1950s, I don't think any Chinese policymakers were considering anything is more important than the war. Yeah. So when any any country is on the war, certainly the war is always the first priority of their foreign policy.
And they are complaining like, the Chinese are not helping, or there's the expectation, obviously. Is there anything China can do?
Well, I think both sides complain, and everyone complain that everyone hope the other countries will help them. And so they said, I don't think this is unique or anything special. And any country on the wall and will ask others to help them. And also simultaneously they will ask their rivalries to help them, like that. So there's no reason. This is a motivation. Because any party on the wall, they always believe they're right, the other side is wrong. And so they think everyone should help them. And the Russia and Ukraine and actually have the same attitude toward the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm.
No difference.
Yeah, currently we are seeing kind of like deeper and deeper involvement of NATO nations or European nations and more firmer support from Washington, from Brussels. So which side is having this upper hand, short term or long term?
The deeper involvement of the NATO members just means that they don't have the capability to win the war in short term. It doesn't mean anything. That just means that it becomes more and more difficult for them to win the war. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I just feel that neither side has the capability to end the war in short term. Otherwise, you cannot see why there's a stagnant at the battleground.
Mm-hmm. Taking into consideration of this, of course, the U.S. Policy on China, tensions between the two countries, the Ukraine war, Gaza war, and conflicts beyond these aforementioned the wars there. How do you characterize the current global system? How long it will continue?
I use the term counter-globalization.
How long will it continue?
I think at least a decade.
At least a decade.
Yeah, at least a decade from now on. No shorter than that. Yeah.
So we are continuing basically the opposite direction of...
The whole situation will get worse and worse rather than to get any improvement.
But at the same time, we are seeing regional integration, sort of like RCEP or CPTPP. Regional countries are talking about, for example, China, Japan, South Korea are talking about the trilateral free trade deal.
This kind of a club cooperation and certainly is a positive, but they have a very limited impact on the global order. The global order at this moment mainly and shaped by the deglobalization economic policy and anti-human rights policy.
Well, Washington is going to have, there's a likelihood that Trump is coming back to the White House. Are you concerned, from the Chinese perspective? Trump talked about imposing 6% of tariffs on Chinese goods.
Well, no matter who win the election, they will adopt the containment policy against China. The only difference is that, and Trump may focus on the economic parts, and Biden will focus on the political and the strategic parts. So the difference is between just which parts, and China will face more pressure from China rather than the direction. And
so, of course, we have these big players, China, U.S., Russia, and China-Russia relationship has been really stable with the leaders meeting each other frequently. But of course, that's also part of the issues the Westerners often raise with the Chinese side. How do you make of that?
Oh, I think
they say, oh, you are too close to Russia because Russia is invading Ukraine, so we are not happy with that. It's affecting our relationship with China.
I think China make the decision according to its own interests. And so China take considering his national interest first, and also China in general maintain a kind of neutrality and do not involve in this war and provide no arms to each side. I think China did in some way, and I think China did much better than the U.S. in terms of maintaining the world peace. And Americans provide weapons to one side of the wars, and not only Ukraine, but also in Gaza. And so you will find that Americans' weapons or arms are already used for undermine the global order. And there's you can see almost no Chinese weapons for used to undermine the world order.
Mm-hmm. The U.S. policy, in a sense, is perpetuating those wars, either in Ukraine or Gaza. So do you think the U.S., well, with the changes around the world, do you think what's their priority, their purpose? It seems like some people say we need to defeat China so we can remain number one in terms of basically, economically, militarily, everything there.
Yeah.
What will be the impact around the world? Basically, globalization gone, free trade gone, and is that the way for the U.S. to remain number one?
Well, that depends on U.S. capability, and the U.S. want to maintain as a world leader, but then that depends on their capability. If they don't have that capability, they cannot reach that goal. And at this moment, I doubt U.S. has that capability to maintain its international status as solid as it enjoyed during the post-Cold War period. After the end of the Cold War, U.S. really have enjoyed the domination of the world and become the world global leader. But now today, I doubt U.S. can continue and enjoy that kind of international
status.
Because
US
they don't have that capability.
Militarily, they are still the number one.
No matter what, and no matter military or the economy, technology, and any the so-called comprehensive capability, and it's no longer that dominating as the post-Cold War period.
Because of the rise of the West?
And I think in some way it's the gap of the power gap between China and the U.S. have been narrowed. And also, the international norms and has already undermined by the U.S. So, and Americans' own ideology, liberalism, and already undermined by the rise of the populism in the United States. So all these factors make American can no longer being that kind of a global power today.
It's like they are doing a disservice to themselves.
Well, at this conference, a lot of people talking about the experience, how the major powers being ruined. And I think most people agree, major power destroyed by themselves rather than by external factors.
Thank you, Professor Yan. Thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you very much.